In 1990, a hillwalker crossing a peat bog in the Scottish borders pulled a broken stick out of the black mud. It was a yew longbow, 6,000 years old, the oldest ever found in Britain. Now look at where he was standing: bare grass, wet peat, not a tree for miles. Yew doesn't grow there, nothing woody grows there. Two retired biologists decided that bow wasn't a curiosity, it was evidence. So they bought the entire valley below it and removed every sheep. Everyone told them that would be enough to bring the forest back. It wasn't, not remotely. The place is called Rotten Bottom. That is its real name, and it earns it. A flat, sodden plateau of peat hags at around 660 meters, up above the Moffat Hills, where your boots go into the ankle and the water that comes up around them is the color of strong tea. There is no shelter. There is nothing to hold on to. It is the kind of ground you cross quickly with your head down, which is probably why nobody had noticed the sticks sticking out of the peat before. The bow was broken, but what survived was 1 1/3 meters of it. Whole, it would have been about 1.74 meters. Radiocarbon dating placed it between 4040 BC and 3640 BC, early Neolithic, before farming had really begun to chew into the vegetation of northern Britain. It went to the Museum of Scotland in Edinburgh, labelled as the oldest bow found in Britain or Ireland. Nothing is known about the person who dropped it. Now walk downhill from the bog and look at the valley below. Carrifran, 650 hectares of glacier-cut ground running from about 160 meters at the road up to 820 at the tops. Steep sides, a burn running fast down the middle. Sheep and grass, endless, close-cropped, hard-grazed grass, with bracken creeping through the lower slopes. In the whole catchment there was, effectively, one tree. A single rowan, alive on a crag so awkward that even goats couldn't reach it. Here is the part that gets skipped. That valley did not look damaged. It looked like Scotland. It looked like the photograph on the shortbread tin, the open sweep of hill that people drive hours to see and describe as unspoiled. It wasn't unspoiled, it was eaten. Because the same peat that preserved the bow had been preserving something else, pollen. Core samples taken from Rotten Bottom, organized through the Museum of Scotland, produced an unusually detailed record of what had been growing around there when the bough was dropped. Alder, elm, hazel, birch, oak, willow, rowan, hawthorn, juniper. Some Scots pine, thinning out shortly after the bow's date. 6,000 years ago, that was not bare hill. It was a mixed, working wood, and someone was hunting through it with a yew stave. That pollen record is the receipt, and it explains something uncomfortable. The bare southern uplands are among the most photographed landscapes in Britain and among the most stripped. A millennium and more of grazing by sheep, cattle, and feral goats, plus fire and felling, had ground the trees out, not in one disaster, but slowly. Every seedling eaten in its first year. Then the next one. Then the next. Until the old seed-bearing trees finally died of age with nothing behind them. People defended that emptiness because they had never seen the alternative. Nobody alive had. Enter Philip and Myrtle Ashmole. Not foresters, not landowners, not rich. They were biologists, seabird people of all things, with a career built around islands and oceans, living near the borders and looking at hills that, professionally, they knew were wrong. In 1993, with a group from Peeblesshire Environmental Concern, they landed on an idea that sounded absurd when you said it out loud. Don't plant a corner of something. Buy an entire catchment, watershed to watershed, then bring the whole thing back. 3 years of searching followed. They needed a valley with the right shape, the right altitude range, the right geology, and crucially, an owner willing to sell. In 1996, they found Carrifran, sitting off the A708 outside Moffat. About a third of it was already designated for its scientific interest, thanks to rare plants clinging to crags where nothing could climb up and eat them. The full price was around £400,000. They did not have £400,000. No institution was going to hand two retired biologists a valley. So here's the correction to the story you've probably been told. The Ashmoles did not buy Carrifran. Roughly 600 strangers did. The group wrote letters, actual letters posted in the mid-90s, before the internet was any use for this, asking ordinary people to put in around £200 each and become a founder of something that did not exist yet. About 80% of the purchase money came from private individuals. Not one penny of public money went into buying the land. This was crowdfunding roughly a decade before anyone used the word, and rewilding 13 years before the word went mainstream. Ashmole has been characteristically flat about it. Asked about the achievement, he told The Guardian in 2024, "It wouldn't be here if it wasn't for all of us." On the 1st of January 2000, the day the land legally changed hands, volunteers were already on the hill putting trees in the ground. Good story, nice photograph. They had the valley, the money, the plan, and a 6,000-year-old pollen record telling them exactly which species belonged there. What they did not have was any solid reason to believe those trees would live. And this is where the obvious question arrives, the one everyone asks. If the trees were killed by grazing and you take the grazing away, doesn't the wood just come back on its own? That's what natural regeneration means. Fence the sheep out, wait, walk away. No. And that is the whole story. Because when the group surveyed what was actually growing in Carrifran, they found the trap. There was almost no seed source left. A handful of birch, rowan, hazel, hawthorn, and willow scraps clinging to gullies, and a complete absence of some of the key species. No sessile oak in the catchment, no wych elm, no alder. Nothing to produce the acorns, the seeds, the wind-carried fluff that would recolonize those slopes. The Borders Forest Trust put it plainly in their own records. Seed sources on site were too scarce to rely on natural regeneration. That is the bottleneck. A forest needs a forest to make a forest. Take the sheep off a valley that still has parent trees, and yes, it will heal itself, sometimes frighteningly fast. Take the sheep off a valley where the parents died 300 years ago, and you don't get a wood. You get taller grass. You could fence Carrifran and walk away for another 1,000 years and come back to almost exactly what you left. Which creates an awkward problem for anyone who likes their rewilding pure. To restart a natural process, they were going to have to do something extremely unnatural. Plant, by hand, hundreds of thousands of trees. But they did it in a specific way, and the way matters. Volunteers went out across the wider region collecting seed from surviving native trees, the local genetic stock, the ones that had proved they could handle that rain and that wind. Commercial nurseries grew them on in compost plugs under stock control tight enough that only Carrifran's own seed came back as Carrifran saplings. Then people carried them up the hill in bags and put them in the ground, across roughly 350 hectares between 150 and 450 meters. Downy birch went in first and heaviest, over half of everything planted. Not for looks. Birch is the species that starts fixing the ground for everything after it. Site manager Andy Wilson still describes it in exactly those terms, saying downy birch matters because it puts nutrients back into the soil that then help all the other trees. Then sessile oak, around 14%. Rowan, 10%. Then the rest, alder, ash, aspen, willows, wych elm, holly, bird cherry, hazel. Meanwhile, the fence went up, 11 kilometers of it ringing the entire catchment. The sheep came off. The feral goats, around 40 of them, were caught and moved out alive, which mattered locally because some neighbors had known those goats their whole lives and were not thrilled about a group of incomers deciding they didn't belong. And the fence, it turned out, was not a triumph. It was an admission. Roe deer jump it. Snow drifts bury it, and sheep walk over the top. Since 2015, around 25 roe deer have been shot inside Carrifran every single year by a professional stalker as a permanent running cost, not a one-off clearance, a subscription. In a functioning system, something else would be doing that job. Nothing else is. So, valley bought, sheep gone, goats gone, fence up, tens of thousands of trees going in every year with volunteers doing the hardest and highest ground. And then, for years, nothing happened. That is not a dramatic flourish. From 1998, systematic bird counts were run through the valley every May and June. Through 2007, 7 full years after planting began, with hundreds of thousands of saplings already in the ground, the surveys were still recording only 2 woodland bird species at Carrifran, willow warbler and chaffinch, in numbers under 5. In 2007, the total count of woodland birds in the whole valley came to 4 individuals. 4. Worse, the first measurable change was a loss. Wheat ears had been common on that short-cropped turf. Once the sheep were gone, the grass grew thick and rank, and after 2006 wheat ears became scarce at Carrifran, while holding their numbers perfectly well in the grazed valley next door. So the honest scoreboard at that point read, birds you used to have, gone. Birds you were promised, absent. They bought a valley and grew grass. The high ground was even more brutal. Textbook establishment time for a young tree is about 5 years. On Carrifran's exposed upper slopes, it was taking 7, sometimes more. To get anything to survive up there, crews had to scrape the vegetation off, break up the peat layer, and mix it into mineral soil, add fertilizer, then armor each plant against voles and mountain hares with guards and wire netting. Placement was everything, down to the meter. Wilson's rule of thumb for the willows is almost poetic in its bluntness. They go, he says, where you can imagine snow will lie. So why didn't they quit? Partly stubbornness. Partly because the people who had paid £200 each were not expecting a refund, but mostly because the trees weren't actually dying. Survival monitoring showed mortality under 10% across most of the valley. The trees were alive, they were just short. That was the thing nobody had priced in. A birch at knee height is not habitat, it's a stick with leaves. A blackcap cannot nest in it, a garden warbler cannot hide in it, a tree pipit has nothing to sing from. Habitat doesn't begin when you plant. Habitat begins at head height. For 7 years, Carrifran was a forest that existed entirely below the threshold where anything could use it. Around 2008 and 2009, it crossed that line, and then it went off like a switch. Blackcap, lesser redpoll, dunnock, garden warbler, siskin, then missel thrush, tree pipit, great tit, then robin, blackbird, woodcock, song thrush. Between 2008 and 2015, 12 woodland species arrived that had simply not been there before. Volunteers on the hill talked most about the willow warblers, that thin falling song, everywhere, in a valley where a decade earlier you could stand for an hour and hear nothing but meadow pipits and wind. Here is the number. Total woodland birds recorded in the valley, 4 in 2007, 262 in 2015, and the composition flipped underneath it. Meadow pipit, the classic open hill bird, had made up 79% of everything counted. By 2015, it was down to 34%, not because pipits collapsed, but because the valley had filled up with everything else. Now, the obvious objection. Couldn't that just be a good run? Better weather? A regional upswing? Luck? No, and this is the part that makes the whole case stand up. The same surveyor, over the same 18 years, was counting birds in the valley immediately next door. Black Hope. Same rock, same rain, same altitude, same weather, same everything, except Black Hope kept its sheep and got no trees. Across the entire period, Black Hope showed no comparable change at all. Meadow pipit and wheatear stayed the most abundant birds there, exactly as before. Same hill. One fence between them. One valley filled with birdsong and one that didn't move a single step in 18 years. Then came the handover, which is the moment the whole project was actually built for. Carrifran has now largely stopped being planted, not because the money ran out, but because natural regeneration has started. Trees are seeding themselves. The saplings the volunteers carried up in bags have become the parents. That thing that couldn't happen in 2000 because there was nothing left to breed from is now happening on its own. The rest followed the trees. Foxes and badgers became common. Otters, stoats, weasels, buzzards, peregrines, ravens, occasional owls. More than 20 mammal species recorded. Fungi and invertebrates turning up as new records for the area. And in 2020, the one rowan that had survived on its unreachable crag, the tree they call the Survivor, was voted Scotland's Tree of the Year, then went on to represent Scotland in the European competition. The last tree standing became the mascot of the wood that grew back around it. It didn't stay in one valley either. Borders Forest Trust bought Corehead and the Devil's Beef Tub in 2009, then Tala and Gameshope in 2013 together, the wild heart of southern Scotland. Rewilding Britain names Carrifran as one of the triggers for the wave of community-led rewilding that followed. And in 2025, when Cumbria Wildlife Trust set about restoring England's highest nature reserve on Skiddaw, they came north to study how Carrifran had done it. Wilson, quoted in The Guardian, said what he enjoys most is the reaction of people arriving. They look at the valley, he said, and just go, wow! And then the story got stranger, in a way nobody had promised or planned. Just down the road from Carrifran, the south of Scotland. Golden Eagle Project began moving eagle chicks from the Highlands and the Islands into the Moffat Hills in 2018. Before it started, the entire south of Scotland held about 3 known breeding pairs, a remnant population, fragmented and probably doomed. By the mid-2020s, the figure was around 46 to 50 birds, the highest number recorded in southern Scotland in 300 years. Moffat has declared itself Scotland's first eagle town. Nobody planted Carrifran for eagles. It was planted for warblers and oak, but a Borders Forest Trust trustee now describes seeing golden eagles over the valley as unremarkable. Bring binoculars, no guarantees, but it happens. A wood that was bought to fix a pollen record has ended up sitting underneath the biggest raptor recovery in southern Britain. It was not free. Roughly £400,000 to buy, 11 kilometers of fence, upwards of 750,000 trees planted over more than 2 decades, and about 25 deer shot every year, indefinitely, because nothing bigger exists to do it. It was not painless. The open ground species genuinely lost habitat, and the wheatears that left did not come back. Black grouse, which everyone hoped would surge, never showed a sustained increase. The plan to push woodland up to the natural tree line in the high-hanging valley, 600 to 750 meters, some of the rarest habitat in Britain, has been running on volunteer effort and trial plots, partly because public funding for it never materialized. Deep peat is deliberately left unplanted, because planting trees on peat is a good way to lose carbon while claiming to save it. And none of it transfers to a hillside that still has seed trees, where the honest answer is cheaper, take the pressure off, and get out of the way. That is exactly why it's believable. This wasn't force, it was leverage, applied to one load-bearing point. Carrifran had 2 things missing: something eating every seedling and no parents left to make seedlings. Remove only the grazing and you get grass. Plant only the trees and the deer eat them. Do both once and the system takes itself back. Philip Ashmole is in his 90s now, walking through a wood that will not look finished for another century. Myrtle died in April 2025. Asked what the valley has actually produced, he doesn't reach for the bird counts. He says the word that keeps coming back to him from visitors is inspiration, and that this is what they always hoped it would offer. Up above all of it, Rotten Bottom is still there. The same black peat, the same boot suck, the same flat sodden nothing where a hunter lost a yew-bow 6,000 years ago and the ground quietly kept the receipt. They did not rewild that valley. Nature was never removed from it. What was removed was its ability to start over. 600 strangers, a fence, and a few 100,000 seedlings gave that ability back, and then the humans stepped aside and let a 6,000-year-old argument finish itself.